Good morning, Dr. Sam Newton.
Morning, Tim.
An old friend of Time Team, our Anglo-Saxon expert, our harp player, an Anglo-Saxon poetry reciting person for many Time Teams. I think I remember you last, Sam, or a particular shoot we were on where we cremated Raksha, thus showing her dedication to archaeology. We constructed a pyre, and you were around. And do you want to tell us what you got up to during that shoot?
Well, it was just an amazing cremation to actually witness a full thing, full scale like that. And I thought it would be appropriate to sort of enhance what you were doing in the landscape by trying to recreate some of the lost soundscape that would have been associated with an event like that. Particularly, there would be some sort of epitaph, some sort of verse honouring the achievements of the great lady. And of course, there would inevitably be a musical accompaniment to that in the form of a stringed instrument that we now call the lyre. They call them harps, but there's a slight differentiation in the type of musical instrument. So a lyre, and it was great. So I composed a little epitaph in Old English, and Phil declaimed it because, of course, Phil's wonderful Wiltshire accent is actually quite close to the authentic Old English of Alfred and the West Saxons. So he was halfway there, and I did the musical accompaniment. But the whole thing was so spectacular, and accompanied by a great hog roast with some excellent Leicestershire beer. It really hit all the right buttons, I thought. In fact, Tim, just bear with me. I can share a few images of that.
Okay.
Because ever since I've used it, the pictures I took in teaching, particularly when we look at Beowulf, where we have detailed descriptions of pre-Christian burial rites, including cremation, and clearly there are major events, and in many ways much more work and much more investment than just an inhumation, though of course they're very important too. But for a start, you've got the garden of the wood and the proper building of the pyre, and there she is all laid out, and we got it going. There we are, and already it's getting really warm, and Tony and the crew are far too close, and they're getting in the smoke. And so then it got to that one, and really, what you can see how they all had to go back. So actually, it's a very efficient way, a very thorough way to do the job. And eventually, it starts to die. Now, of course, I'm relieved to show you this picture where you haven't got Raksha on it. Raksha contemplating her own funeral pyre. That's quite something. And it just wandered.
Sam, how did we know about the details of how to make the pyre and the various rites that went around it? Where were you getting that information from?
Well, what the primary Old English source would be the great Old English poem Beowulf. Constructing a pyre, you're not just heaping up a random pile of wood. It's got to be done properly. And analogous ways in which it's still done across the world. They're still going for serious cremations, of course, of this traditional kind in India. Now it's all in England. It's all modern and gas fired. But you really got to do the job properly. You don't want to have a half burnt member of the family left the next morning. And it burns and burns and burns. And the time scale here. Then we all went off to the pub, as you do, and there. That was what it was like the next morning, and you can see that you also very efficiently organised the firing, the making of an authentic replica Anglo-Saxon funeral urn. You can see it there, and have I got the rest of that? Yeah, here we are, close up of it, which is beautifully done. I don't know who made that, but it's was that Gilbert? Was it Gilbert Burroughs, a great ceramicist? That's what's left. So her cremated remains would be placed inside those urns, and the urn, as we know from the archaeology of the big cremation sites like Spong Hill in Norfolk, they might be kept with the family for a while till they go to these great communal burial places, and obviously they're much more portable as a portable way to move remains of your family members to be interred with the big communal, and you get them at different places. They're always prominent places in the landscape with a history. So it was really good. And what else we got? Yeah, that's probably the best one. I think that's one of yours, Tim. And it's so evocative, and it evokes dragon's fire, and in Beowulf we have a lovely description of it, more gruesome detail than we really want, and how it culminates with a simple phrase in Old English: "Heaven swallowed the smoke," and it's like one way in which people would see this, come to terms with the loss, the death of your old grandmother or grandfather, and that their spirits can be seen visibly rising in the smoke to heaven. That's just one of those metaphors.
And how do you say that in Anglo-Saxon, Sam?
I've got that right. I can quote it. Is it that one? There's all the detail of Wan Sewolchnum Walferamast Chluna de Fuchloa. Havelen Bulton Benyeto Bostan Don Blood at Sprang Lath Beta Leeches. That's it.
That's it. Well done. For us, the story of the Anglo-Saxons really started at Athelney with our work there.
Yes, unforgettable printout from ancient geophysics and old digital printer.
And we returned then in 2003. I think one of the things that was fascinating about the background information, which you know about so well, is the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle and
yes.
having Assa's life. What is it that's so amazing about that information that we've got about Alfred, Athelney, his life, that collection of documents that gives us so much behind those sites?
The fact that they are almost exactly contemporary, they are coming from what is essentially a chronicle compilation committee, probably in Winchester, with Alfred at in the chair. And Assa's life is really following that. So the chronicle is the primary source, but Assa's life is invaluable as giving us an interpretation of how it was understood at the time, which helps us to understand what is meant there. And obviously there's an element of Victor's always write the history books, and this is the West Saxon view of its own successful war against the Danes, who were of course a devastating lot, and they had they'd destroyed and taken over every other kingdom in Anglo-Saxon England. Mercia, the biggest and the most powerful, they had effectively probably their main target divided into two. And so West Saxons was, once they sorted out Mercia, they were going to come for the West Saxons, which they did with a vengeance, and several serious campaigns, 875, 876, again 877, and then as Captain Mannering would have called it, a raid in the middle of the Christmas season, well, right at the end, 12th night, out of the blue, not in the cricketing season at all. He would have called it a typical shabby Nazi trick. And the West Saxons were taken by surprise. Alfred was forced into retreat, but clearly he has prepared, I mean, this is the inference of what the Chronicle is saying, fallback positions, as you would. They've been before he came to the throne when there were two Danish armies threatening, one was actually loose in the kingdom. They clearly bought time, almost certainly involved paying Danegeld at that early stage, which of course is what the Chronicle doesn't admit to. And so the fallback position, using the natural strengths of the West Saxon landscape, the Fenland retreat of Athelney is a perfect defensive base, like Ely in the Fens, which was so difficult for William the Conqueror in 1069, 1070. You can't approach them with a serious army over land, obviously, and you can't really get at them with your fleet because most of it's too shallow, and you need local knowledge. And so he's really got himself well organized for a defensive campaign. And because it's like playing chess, you know, if you capture the king, that's it. But So Alfred is the great asset that manages to survive. And then from there, he clearly has thought through, he can't just stay on defense all the time. He's got to take the offensive. He's got to win the initiative. He's got, like any school of generalship will be teaching, you've got to get the enemy to answer to your moves if you want to achieve anything. It's no good just letting them have the initiative. So taking the initiative so dramatically, and clearly he's got also not only reconnaissance, he's got communications with enough of the free English who can then meet so dramatically at a prearranged date in May at this mysterious site, Egbertstone, which the Chronicle narrates. That's where they go. They move from Athelney, and I followed this route on my motorbike actually, which was great fun. In fact, one May, it was just great, up through what later is an old, said to be an old drover's road called the Hard Way, up to Salisbury Plain, and by this geography, Egbertstone almost certainly looks like Kingston Deverill, just tucked away in the downs there, out of sight at the valley bottom, so that the Danes will not notice him. Obviously, it's staying off the skyline. And there's the great coming together of all the West Saxon, I think the men of Hampshire, Somerset, and Wiltshire. It's wonderful understatement of the Chronicle. It says of when they saw the king, they were glad. Or in the Old English, was they were fain. The word fain, Old English word for glad. It's actually an understatement. You can imagine the cheering and the real hope that they've suddenly got through having the ability to concentrate and the leadership of Alfred. And from there, then it's very clear the geography. Michael Wood followed in the footsteps very dramatically and very, very charmingly not long ago on his recent series on Alfred and Athelstan. And from there up towards what's now Warminster, and there up to Essendon, which is now, I think, with really no serious alternative, Eddington, and the Danes almost certainly were using the old Iron Age fort, now called Bratton Castle, just above Eddington, as a natural place of authority in the landscape that was already fortified and had been since the Iron Age. And it's actually, if you've been up there, it's great. You can actually drive up there. There's a nice memorial stone, a Marquis of Bath, Sarsen stone, and the ramparts are really steep, and as if, and it's quite likely that the Danes would have had them recut, deepen the ditches, steepen the ramparts. And of course, you've got the White Horse of Westbury just on the westish side.
The places that we were familiar with, there's some suggestion that Athelney, that Alfred had a fort there, because I think it was one of we wanted to relook at the Abbey, but we also wanted to see if the fort that he talks about with the connecting to Ling, how certain are we about the location when you get nearer to Athelney? Are we more certain about the locations of things?
Oh, I think so. I mean, the place names, Athelney itself is such a strong, it's an unusual one. The island of the Aethelings, the princes. It's as if it's named after its primary function of a secure base deep in those impenetrable fens, and the series of causeways linking the various islands, which would be controlled by I think you did very well pinpointing the ramparts that control access on and off. And causeways themselves are very difficult for an army to advance along. Of course, there's the famous poem of the Battle of Maldon, where General Berthelot holds the causeway that connects the island where the Danes are, stops them coming. They can only advance on a narrow front. It's one of those classic heroic situations where just a few brave men can withstand an army.
So effectively, Alfred had reinforced or built a fort. I think there was some evidence we found of it having some Iron Age origin.
Yeah.
Reinforces that fort and then makes that promontory connection with Ling, which itself is one of the towns, I think, on the Burgle High Ditch.
It is, yeah, it's on my map, isn't it?
And what does that asset, Ling as an asset on the Burgle Heidage, what can we tell people about the role that Ling played and the role that the Burgle Heidage played?
Ling, do you want me to pull up my map there?
Oh, if you can do it.
I think I've got it still open. Yeah, there we are. That is, put that a bit bigger. Is that all right? It's on edit mode, but you can see the map.
Yeah.
So Ling is there.
Ling.
Number 21. In there you can see I've delineated the wetlands there, and number 21 is 100 men, and it's 412 feet. That's quite small, but what we're talking about, after all, is just a single rampart that controls access off the causeway. So it's going to be a naturally very strong place. That's why you're not going to need that many. 100 men would certainly be enough to, and that really, the importance of Ling is it controls the landward access via the causeways to Athelney. Nowadays, of course, the fens are all dry, well, usually fairly dry around there, and there's a little bypass and stuff. But it's part of a whole network of buildings. Another prominent one off to the east at Boroughbridge, and it's his position of strength. And it's also significant that he continues to use it as his main base, even after he has defeated the Danes at Eddington and then besieged them and forced them to capitulate in the follow-up siege that followed at Chippenham. And then when he's ready to receive their formal surrender and baptism, it's still taking place near Athelney at Allow, of course, the island of the Alders. And then formally the whole thing's concluded at Wedmore, just to the north. So he's still maintaining his position of strength, and he's obviously proceeding very carefully because the Danes have broken their oath more than once before, and they're still a threat, and he's still, it's a big gamble he's taken, not by forgiving them. I mean, that was unprecedented. As it turned out, that was a hugely important diplomatic stroke because it was an oath that the Danes really couldn't break. And as we learn later, he's actually becomes their godfather, and well, actually, it changes the whole religious history of Denmark eventually. But you've just got to.
Sam, who's the main Dane that we're talking about here? Guthrum?
Yeah. Oh well, the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, the scribe who wrote the name down clearly wasn't sure what it meant. He would have heard a Danish name, which would be something like Guthorma, which means battle dragon. But Guthrum's not really. It should be something like Guthworm in Old English, but he obviously didn't quite hear it properly, so he wrote it down as Guthrum. Which we've got a few people around here called Gudrum who regard themselves as descendants of, which is possible as he settled in this part of the world eventually, which is what's so interesting with the local connection that connects Athelney and Alfred and Guthrum to this part of the world. And we think we know his burial place as well. In fact, there was a hope of a time team project on the grave of King Guthrum, possibly in Hadley, according to a local version of the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle maintained at Bury. But it meant excavating the graveyard of Hadley Church, but you didn't seem at all worried about that.
When you talk about the defense of Athelney and the defeat of Guthrum, or the bringing together of Guthrum into that system, it also makes me think about the number of burials we looked at where there were spears and shields and places like that. And I don't know whether we did bury an Anglo-Saxon cemetery with you on Time Team, or whether I'm sure independently you've seen them. But what is your impression? Of course, Bremer was a very interesting site near Hampshire, where we had those double burials. What does Anglo-Saxon archaeology and history gain from that material which has come to us from all those cemetery sites?
Um, well, it's revealing a people who are otherwise forgotten, lost. We see something of their the things that were important to them, that were part of their lives, that they would like to go out with and lie alongside. So the weapons, those beautiful buckets, they're more sort of precious vessels than buckets. Buckets sound a bit too utilitarian to a modern ear, and just they would have been remembered in their day. Of course, there would have been poetry about their achievements that were perhaps remembered in the family. In fact, one of the interesting genres of preserved in the Old English heroic stuff is clearly genealogically structured poetry. Remember, mostly, of course, what survives applies to the kings and aethelings, but it's a characteristic genre, and it's a natural thing. And in the old medium of poetry, that's how they would remember the old days and what grandmother did and grandfather, and where they're buried, of course. A lot of those burial places would be remembered probably through the medium of poetry. I remember talking to old Stanley West, a Suffolk archaeologist, now retired, that he was always very impressed with how tidy the pre-Christian graves were, and the cemeteries. They're all laid out neatly, whereas the later Christian ones tended to get all sort of higgledy-piggledy because they were reused in the relatively constricted area of consecrated ground. And he wondered if there was some sort of grave marker they would have had. Of course, barrows would speak for themselves, but the ordinary inhumations, how did they remember who was buried where and where they were buried? And poetry is certainly one medium, perhaps even runic inscriptions in wood, which would not survive, which would complement the poetry as well. So
Sam, you were at West Langton.
Yeah.
And do you remember your first sight of the gilded brooch? And
I do.
How did you feel about that?
And you captured it, a lovely picture, Tim, with the afternoon sun glinting on it, and very touching. And when you see, I mean, if any of us lie buried, especially in acid soil like that, and we're dug up in 1,000 years' time, there's not going to be much of us left. But if we're buried with something like that, that really stands out, doesn't it? I mean, clearly that was something very personal to, it was a female burial, but of a lady buried there. We remember her. And I hope to have, with the reenactment of the soundscape through simulating an Old English epitaph, to do some justice to that. I mean, in many ways, she foreshadowed Rackshar there. What did I call her in the epitaph? Our sharp shovel lady. Shovel wife, that was, I called her shovel wife.
And you subsequently, you were involved in 2 Time Team specials where we looked at the Prittlewell burial,
Yes.
but also the amazing Staffordshire hoard, which must have changed.
Yeah.
Did that radically change people's views of Anglo-Saxon history and material and skills? It was a revolutionary find, really, wasn't it?
Oh, yes, both of them were. In fact, just let me move this. I'm going to unshare this screen. And I've got another map to show you. This is focusing on the southeast of Britain, and these are the royal, what I call the royal burials. I think Helen calls them high status burials. And the places we know archaeologically are in capitals. The lowercase ones are the places we know from the documentary sources. And I've just put a few sort of symbols of the kind of things that we're finding there. We were finding, well, Taplow is probably the first, which characterized by lovely gold and garnet fittings, lovely buckle there, and feasting equipment, drinking horns, and these lovely lyres. And that's a lovely reconstruction by Michael J. King. And then Prittlewell repeated that pattern. But of course, the most impressive of all is Sutton Hoo, which has all that pattern in such extraordinary quality, masterpieces from master workshop. What the Staffordshire Hall did was broaden that hugely. And I think I've got the wrong file open again.
One of the things I hadn't realised, Sam, was that the garnets from Sutton Hoo and in other Anglo-Saxon finds, in some cases they're originating from places like Burma. They're incredibly distant.
Yes, certainly, yeah. South Asia, Jalalabad, Sri Lanka is another place, and they can do this by some sort of wizard scientific scanning thing, X-ray fluorescent scanning, that shows the chemical. Well, basically, the chemistry is very complicated, but they show patterns of impurities, and if you've got the same patterns of impurities in two garnets, they probably come from the same place. And this, I mean, we're talking about an intercontinental garnet set that's coming together here, and it's not just the extraordinary faraway origins, but the skills with which they're cutting them and fitting them into their gold settings. That's a little button, for example. Can you see my little arrow there? Yeah. That shows one of a pair from Sutton Hoo. They're just over, just under an inch in diameter. They're like the sort of buttons you get on a tweed jacket, yeah, with a rounded top and a D loop behind it. But they're just absolutely, the cutting of the garnets at so small a scale with such total precision is extraordinary. And technically, I don't think we know how they did it without some sort of magnification, and presumably some sort of pedal, lathe, drill, wheel cutter. But it's absolutely astonishing. It really is. There's some super guild of high quality, high culture craftsmen, and not just the technicals, but the artistic design, the conceiving of such things. This is
Perhaps if we go back to your picture now, Sam, we'll have a look at you now for a bit. And when did you first see that Staffordshire hoard? When did you first know about it, and how close did you get to the objects? And was it a very memorable, life-changing moment?
It was an announcement on the news in the morning in those days when I used to listen to the BBC, and then it was then I looked up online and saw I think it was the Times had coverage of it. And then later that morning, the BBC Radio 4 actually called me. I don't know how they got my number, and asked me what I thought about it, because at the time we were just celebrating what was I think it was the 70th anniversary of the Sutton Hoo discovery in 1939, and we'd just been saying that one of the problems of Sutton Hoo is that it is so extraordinary. The quality is so high that it is really difficult to see it in perspective in relation to other sites. What Staffordshire Hoard did was bring an amazing quantity of similar stuff to light, albeit in a very different and a very mysterious and still uncertain context. On that, as we went there with Time Team, it was a lovely bit of pasture was being used for pregnant mares, and they all looked very content and happy there. So that was the first, and then a lot of stuff. The Staffordshire has been really good at the online presentation stuff. It was all a bit random at first, but it was better than nothing. And you could see straight away the parallels with Sutton Hoo and also the differences. And it's interesting, in the report that just came out last year, they're saying that some of the best stuff was probably made in the same workshop as the Sutton Hoo stuff. And one likely scenario for it ending up like that is that it was booty captured in battle when the Mercians growing in strength in the course of the second quarter of the 7th century, after the death of our great King Radwold here, first King of England, as I like to remind those in Wessex, that we know from particularly the Venerable Bede that the Mercians were invincible in battle just about, and always smiting their neighbours. I think there were at least 3 East Anglian kings killed in battle against Mercia. And so we've got some very plausible scenarios for how they got hold of that stuff. And clearly, as with warriors and poets and artists gravitate towards the great patrons then as now. And as Mercia's power rose and East Anglia's power waned, naturally they would be gravitating towards there. So it's natural that the Mercian royal house should start to receive those kind of skills and develop its own. So you some of that stuff is some of the other stuff perhaps made in Mercia, or Northumbria certainly has some. I think we're talking about a Northumbrian school. There's a couple of swords there. Well, I say swords, of course, they're only fittings from swords. We haven't got the blades. Extraordinarily, which show parallels with the later Lindisfarne Gospels. And so the Chris Fern and Leslie Webster, who are great specialists in this area, can talk about a Northumbrian collection in the Staffordshire Hoard. And of course, the Mercians were smiting the Northumbrians all the time, and vice versa. And in fact, it was a great Northumbrian success in 655, which is one of the likely contexts for the need to hide that treasure up in the first place.
Which one was that? Was that a particular battle?
Yeah, the Battle of the River Winwad in November 655, which was a startling turnaround for Mercian success under Penda, who's an extraordinarily successful guy. We've never had a proper study of King Penda. He's Bede's villain, which is what makes him even more interesting. and it was Oswald's brother, Oswy. We were at Bedewell. We were looking at Oswy's sister's place, St. Abba, you perhaps remember, or St. Abba. And somehow Oswy is able to maneuver into an advantageous tactical situation, even though Penda's got the heavier numbers, he's got a larger army. Oswy still wins the day. And I think we can pinpoint that battle. So, funnily enough, very close to where the recent work by Michael Wood on the site of the Battle of Brunanburh was located. But that's perhaps another chapter.
And of those objects, Sam, which one sort of stuck in your mind the longest from the Staffordshire Hoard? Was there one particular one?
Out of many treasures, which would be the pyramid mounts, I think, were the first we could see such an abundance of those funny little pairs of pyramid mounts, which were almost certainly associated with sword knots, which had such close parallels, particularly the combination of the garnet with the blue glass, so you get the red and the blue in the gold fitting, and they look so beautiful. When you look really closely, you could see that they weren't quite as finely made as the pair from Sutton Hoo. And so this was, for we local patriots, was a gratifying thing. And indeed, our senior secretary at Sutton Hoo, you probably remember dear old Lynette when you came over there, she was saying, yes, it's as if we've got the masterworks here, they've only got the apprentice works there. But no, there's some great stuff there, really is.
I'm just thinking of other things where you were on site. Of course, there was Prittlewell, which had the extraordinary glass, the Prittlewell burial.
Yeah, that's so beautiful. The feasting side of things is, it's to have that glassware so well preserved. It was really something, along with the drinking horns and the lovely little their sycamore or maple bottles with their little gilt bronze decorated necks and rims, and very similar to what we had at Sutton Hoo. Again, many parallels, and really well excavated. As you probably remember, what's extraordinary about Prittlewell is that it's a burial chamber under a barrow, and it's sandy soil, and the sand has sort of seeped in through the roof of the burial chamber and filled it up before the timbers had rotted, before the roof collapsed. And so amazing that the things which were originally hanging on the burial chamber wall, lots of lovely feasting, the bronze ewer jug from Eastern Mediterranean, a great cauldron and other stuff, it was still in place, held in place by all the sand filling up around it. It was really beautifully done.
And you've taken a great deal of interest in Anglo-Saxon music, if you like, the harp. Your harp is a reconstruction of the Sutton Hoo one?
It is. It's a replica of the Sutton Hoo lyre. I just happen to have it to hand here. And very similar in design to what we found at Prittlewell.
Ah,
And that's the pattern of royal burials with these instruments. And this one's got the authentic, it's replica bling, the garnet inlays, gilt bronze, little eagle designs. I love these double-headed eagle designs. That's never been fully explained. And these must be the property of the king's princes buried there. And I thought Prittlewell really reinforced that view. It's implicit in the poetry. We have descriptions in Beowulf of the old king of the Danes playing these and reciting poetry at the same time. Very moving one. And
Sam, can you give it a strum for us? Is it in
with
tune?
pleasure.
And how do you know? How do we know what the part was tuned to?
Because can you hear that sustaining? Because we have a description. You remember our great archaeology of music man, Dr. Graham Lawson at Prittlewell, and it was so good to work with Graham. We've done quite a bit too. We must do more. There's a Frankish source who's basically I think he's talking about what they call the Gothic kithera, which was their word for one of these, and it really anticipates the development what becomes the guitar. Ultimately, 6 strings, and as you know, I like to thrash the Fender Stratocaster a bit. 6 strings. I thought, well, I could have a go at that. But anyway, we've got a source which refers to the 6-string lyre and how it is tuned. And as long as your middle 2 strings, so that's string 3 and 4, are semitones, then you can structure it around that. So in other words, in this case, my middle 2 are C and D. So that means I've got B and C, G, A, B, C, D, E. So it's a very simple tuning.
Could you give us a bit of a strum?
Checking the tuning, it's holding the tuning. And this was made by a violin maker as an experiment, using all his skills and all the wood that had had air drying about 20 years before it actually started. And so the older it gets, the more mellow it sounds.
Have a little bit of Anglo-Saxon chanting alongside.
Yeah, just bear with me. I've got where's that one gone?
And you're using your fingers to bridge the notes, as it were.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So what it is doing, Tim, is deadening certain strings. In fact, you can see it here. This is how the lyre looked in 1939. Let me just share screen on that one. Where's it gone, Tim? There we are. Share screen. There we are. That's what it looked like. It was all squash. You just see a bit of it there. I can see my arrow. Squash between 2 bronze bowls, or copper alloys we have to call them these days.
Yeah.
And out of that came the sort of pickled top part of it, as redone by Rupert Bruce Mitford, and enabling him to start to put it back together again. So you've got pegs, you've got the little gilt bronze and garnet eagle designs. One side was a bit twisted, but basically
so you're going to strum the lyre and you're going to sing in old English.
Recite
the verse which is from Beowulf. So
it is from Beowulf, but this is my edition and translation.
Fantastic. So take it away, Dr. Sam Newton.
There was hid on Gleo. Komele Schilding, Felle Fritschende, Voran Rector. The Wheelum Hilde Deo, Harpan Wudu, Gomen Wudu Greta, Wheelum Yerdaraj, Soth and Salach. Wheelum Sillage Spell, Recht after Richt, Romhod Kuning. Wheelum Efton Gan, Eldo Yabunden, Gomul Boothwiga, Yeogot Breathing, Hilda Strengo, Prether Innerweo, Don Hay, Wintram Flood, Warn Yamunda.
Bravo, thank you, Sam.
Thank you, Tim.
Excellent. It's very nice to see the harp in the foreground and the Stratocaster in the back.
Yes, that's right. That's right. Yeah.
Just let's have a look at can you see the soundboard? Can you show the camera the soundboard?
Well, what we're talking about here is
lift it up a bit. That's it. So what makes it resonate?
It is the pressure of the strings on the bridge, and my violin maker innovated a wider bridge. The Anglo-Saxon surviving examples are quite narrow, which of course makes it much easier to play. But the wider the bridge, the more the resonance is generated by the vibration of the strings through to the hollow. The soundboard is under the lovely thin maple wood here. Maple then as now being the most resonant of all the woods. They, as you can imagine, they really do different characteristics of the different woods and use them to the full. And so you will remember Graham and Zachary, someone did the replica at Prittlewell. And so you've got, and you can see the top is solid, there's a lot of pressure, but all these, the arms are hollow and the body is hollow. It's all dished out with this very thin maple board covering it, and it is that sound, that shape, which gives you the resonance. And the older it gets, the more resonant it sounds. And I said to Con Rendell, who made this beautiful thing, I think you made it so beautiful, it just gets sweeter and sweeter. He said, yes, but what really makes it resonate better and better is the playing of it. The vibrations continue, hence an old Stradivarius, which is why the Prittlewell work was so useful, because do you remember that one had been really badly damaged and repaired? And it must have been a really difficult repair to do, particularly the top of the bridge, the yoke crosspiece had been cracked, and they put a plate on the top, a plate underneath, and between the pegs they had put pins. You know, really difficult. You'd think it must have been a write-off, but and to go to that effort, it must mean that instrument was very, very personal and meant a great deal to the man who lay in state there. You know, and that was his Stradivarius. He couldn't possibly forsake it for a new one. And also a big crack across the back. You know, really had taken some damage.
Yeah.
And they're lovely little staples, and they'd been decorated as well.
Yeah.
And it really did emphasise the personal touch. It reminded me actually of Bob Marley, great guitar man. When he died, quite a while ago now. Of course, he was buried with his Gibson guitar, and a few other things. A little bag of herbal tobacco, shall we call it?
Okay, Sam, I've got a few quick questions to end on today's session,
Okay.
although we'd love to come back to you another time.
Can I just, let's unmute myself. The hay fever's suddenly catching up.
Oh yeah, go on then. Blow your nose. Sam is now blowing his nose due to hay fever, or probably dust from all his old books and documents, probably. So put yourself back on again.
Yeah, those dusty books. I can't leave them alone.
We're just reaching a few final questions, Sam, for
Okay.
today. Somebody's going to watch Athelney, we hope, on Sunday. Why do you think Athelney is important for people to watch as a program? Why is it important in the history of Anglo-Saxon archaeology and history? Why watch it?
Oh, it's the embryonic rebirth of England, and all that followed from that. Not least, though he's a West Saxon, he embraced the English language and English literature, and he's not just building physical defences in the Burgle Hidage and organising the manning and maintenance of them. He's setting about the revival of English spiritual strength, which is seen through education and through learning. And rather than teach everybody to speak Latin and read Latin and Greek, can translate all those works of wisdom in all those different languages into English. And so you've got this huge sort of boost to the written English composition, English writing, that culminates, well, it's not just translation, it leads to the development of the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle.
And this begins at Athelney, Sam.
Yeah, it does. If he'd lost at Athelney, well, we wouldn't be speaking the language we speak now, and we wouldn't have had the great tradition of English literature in the same way. We'd be speaking a form of Danish. Actually, you'd be well at home, Tim, as you're with the Danes.
And if we've got that extraordinary core with all those documents, as you mentioned, it really makes you think that Athelney should be a sort of major subject on every school curriculum. The origins of everything you talked about.
Oh, completely. I don't know why. Well, education is a messy business, but I used to be able to study Anglo-Saxon Alfred at A level, but I think that's now a very rare thing, and that's to be deplored. I mean, the whole sense of the language we speak, the deep roots of the English-speaking peoples, and that's not to exclude the Welsh or the Scots or Cornwall. We became all part of the same thing.
When you would go there, last time you went there, do you get a feeling of place when you go there? Does it sort of summon up for you some of those thoughts about what's happened there in the past?
For me, absolutely, positively, yes. But I think some people you need to be at the right time and to be told. Well, your time team reminds us exactly what all the lovely graphics, mixed work, Victor's lovely pictures. It reminds us how important it is setting in the landscape, because it's a very low hill in that landscape. But of course, in the fens, it would be a significant island, as in the place name, and the network of sites around it, like Boroughbridge and Alla and Westling, as you were saying.
And final question: we asked people, if I was to give you time team for a couple of weeks, and you could take them anywhere you liked and do any site you liked, what would be your fantasy time team location?
Well, it would have to be the rest, more of those barrows and adjacent fields at Sutton Hoo. I'd like to include Rendlesham, but that's rather being taken over by others at the moment. Yeah. For the early period, Sutton Hoo, and for Athelney would be pretty high on the list as well, most certainly. It's so important, Athelney, it really is.
And we'd like to end with a little bit of Anglo-Saxon from you. I think we've been having lovely chats with Bernard Cornwell.
Oh, yes.
He quotes a line from the Anglo-Saxon about something like weird something.
Weird bithful arad. Weird bithful arad. Weird fate is fully determined. Fate is that you can't escape your fate.
And say that again.
Weird bithful arad. Weird fate, that which comes to pass, is fully determined, fully set.
What's the correct Anglo-Saxon pronunciation of Athelney?
In the Chronicle, it is Athelinga Aya, the island of Athelings. the island of princes. In other words, the island, the place of protection for the princes.
Isn't that an extraordinary name for us to still have in the landscape?
It is.
The Island of Princes.
Yeah, yeah. We've got an Acklington here deep in what would have been the mid-Suffolk Clayland woodland, which may have been, in this landscape, the equivalent in a deep, hidden woodland context. But Athelney is the most well-known. Really stands out.
Sam, thank you very much for a lovely chat on Team Teatime, and I shall look forward to chatting you again.
Right.
And, we might get strum a few things on the Stratocaster next time.
Oh yes, please. Over the.
And what are you working on at the moment, Sam? Is there a particular study that you're working on or you're working towards?
I'm working on the teaching side. I'm on the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, and that's a Zoom online seminar series I'm running.
What's that called, Sam? How do people get on?
As we're towards the end of the Chronicle, leading us through to some early Middle English. So it's rather a curiously named late old, early middle English language and literature. That sounds like something a beach cover.
That's your title.
Late old, early middle.
To that, Sam, if people want to have a listen to what you're doing on that, how do they sign up for that?
On my website, www.woffings.co.uk.
Spell Woffings?
Woffings, yeah, so got to have your Woffings. And there's other things on there as well, of course.
Spell Woffings, Sam.
Whiskey, uniform, foxtrot, India, November, Golf, Sierra.
Good. So people will be able to hear you going on about the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle and fantastic stuff like that.
That's right. And forthcoming study days include something to do with the Golden Age. And then we've got various other people coming in. I don't know if you know Toby Capwell, Dr. Toby Capwell. He's the curator at the Wallace Collection. In fact, we worked with him, didn't we, on the Vikings special we did. And so he's coming in. We like anniversaries. It's the 500th anniversary of the Field of the Cloth of Gold, 1520. A bit modern for me, but I'm looking forward to it.
Lovely.
And there's loads of stuff.